Hi, my name's Paul Kinvig, Chief Operating Officer of the Bournemouth Town Centre bid. And this is part one of a two-part video interview with Tony Brown, Chief Exec of Beales Limited. And in this video, we're going to be looking and talking to Tony about his career, about the challenges that retailing currently faces, where he sees it going, and what it's like to be Chief Exec of a national chain. Tony, good afternoon.
Afternoon, Paul.
So it's been quite an interesting week, hasn't it, in the sense of another major retailer experiencing difficulties and closing stores.
Yeah, it has, and it's on the back of a whole number of seismic events that have hit the high street. So halving their estate, or practically halving their estate,
Yeah.
is a big decision by them.
Did it surprise you?
No.
Why?
I think when you look at a business like Hoff and the space that they're in and the demographic that they serve, that they need to be in big city centres,
Right.
not peripheral towns. They also need to be in a conurbation that can support more than one department store, and this just isn't them.
Bournemouth has three, of course.
And Bournemouth has three. So I think that wasn't a surprise. I think looking at the overall macroeconomics of House of Fraser, I don't think it was going to get through anyway for much longer, because they were lost 44 million last year. Even though they're privately owned, it was on the cards. Nobody,
I don't think, would disagree that retailing currently is one of the toughest jobs to actually be in. You've been doing it for a long time. How did you get into the business?
Oh gosh, how did I get into the business? By default, really. I started my career in Asda.
Did you?
Many years ago as a security officer. So
did you really?
Yeah, back in those days, it was security. In those days was jangling keys and chasing thieves. It was a grunt job.
Yeah.
But I knew someone who worked for Asda who got me in at the bottom level as a security officer.
You lead a multi-million pound organisation now. Let me take you back to the first time in your first sort of leadership and management role. What was it and what was it like?
Oh, wow. I guess my first proper leadership role was when I was promoted from security officer in Asda to a department manager. Small department, but 4 or 5 staff. But for a young lad back in those days, it was quite a daunting task.
Mm.
And my ego was a lot higher than it is now. So I was pumping my chest out everywhere I could. So that was interesting. And my first proper leadership role was my first store, which was running the Isle of Dogs store in the middle of London, and that was my first experience of store management. And the Isle of Dogs back in those days was pretty much a war zone. It was incredibly difficult, right in the east end of London, right on the edge of Tower Hamlets. I think on my first day there, we had 1 murder, a body in the car park, and 2 cars burnt out.
It's not the kind of thing you get in Beales these days, is it at all?
Normally.
Not normally. So you moved from Asda through into Beales or was there steps between?
There was a couple of steps in between. So I did 19 years in Asda,
right,
and left Asda to become operations director of a company called Summerfield.
Oh yes.
Doesn't exist anymore. It's merged into the co-op. And from Summerfield, I did 2 years in Summerfield, and then went to British Home Stores. So I did 8 years as retail director with Philip Green.
So in your career, you've not just in terms of grocery, but also then in terms of general retailing, you've been involved in those kinds of core historic brands, some of which, as in BHS, effectively no longer exist.
Yeah, that's not my fault.
I wonder just whether there's a bit where you're moving across and it's like, oh no, here comes Tony.
No, in fact, I tried to buy BHS. I was one of the bidders when Dominic Chappelle got it.
Really?
So I put my bid into Philip about 3 weeks before he accepted Dominic Chappelle's.
So even at that point, where you've got that kind of historic brand that's a bit like House of Fraser, that's going through difficulties, did you see a real value in the brand rather than the stores themselves, or was it the if you like the the store rather than the brand.
I think the brand, because it is a heritage brand, or was a heritage brand, or still is actually, because it's out of the Middle East. I think it had a lot of opportunity in it. When Philip and the team that he had with him, himself and a few others, we turned that business into a £1 billion business, making £116 million a year. So there was mileage in it, and I knew I could turn it around with the team that I had working with me.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, my bid wasn't successful.
And history tells us what happened.
Yeah, and there was no need for that business to go under. No need at all.
So the move into Beales.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
I got a fortuitous call one day when I was on holiday saying that there's a department store group that was looking for a CEO, and was I interested? And I remember Moira, who was the headhunter at the time, saying there's only one drawback, and it's in Bournemouth, but they'll pay you a premium to work in Bournemouth. Well, I lived in the New Forest, so
did you tell them that?
No, I said I'll have to wrench the family. So it was ideal.
Yeah.
It couldn't have fallen better for me, because living just up the road, knowing the town, knowing the conurbation.
And what year was this, Tony?
This was 2008.
Wow.
Yeah, difficult year.
It's a brave shout to go from an ops director into a CEO during the biggest financial upheaval pretty much the world's seen since the Great Depression.
Yeah.
That's a big shout.
Well, I came in June, and the financial collapse happened in September. So had I known,
would you still have done it?
Yeah, 100%.
Why?
I think the business presented a challenge anyway.
Yeah.
The business was in a very difficult place. The business had pretty much breached all its covenants with the bank, and the pension trustees were agitated, to say the least. So it took a lot of persuasion in the first 18 months to keep the bank on side, to keep the pension trustees on side. But we did. We demonstrated we had a very credible 3-year plan, despite the downturn.
Yeah.
We'd managed to pull out some pretty good figures in the first 6 months when I got here, just by trading it, by no other magic than getting really aggressive as far as promotions were concerned. That convinced our backers, the bank and the trustees, that we had a credible plan.
Yeah.
And the plan could work. And we were a PLC back in those days, so we had shareholders to please as well.
So you did that, and then talk to me about Australia, because when I first met you'd almost just come back from, or you'd not been back long. How did you end up over in Australia?
Well, I did a couple of jumps after I left here after 5 years, because we moved the business from 10 stores to 31 stores in the 5 years I was here. I then decided to go out on the interim role and take some non-exec director's role. So I went to Cardiff and became interim managing director for Peacocks and Jane Norman.
Yep.
Did that for 6 months. Then going back to my BHS contacts, the CFO of BHS had been put in by the banks to Poundland, to 99p stores, and I was asked to go there as COO to either help fix the business or sell it. And in the end we decided to sell it, so we sold that to Poundland for 57 million, so that took us 2 years to do. Then another friend of mine said, listen, there's a business that needs restructuring in Sydney, and why not?
Before we talk about Sydney, it appears from talking to you that either one of your skills or one of your main interests is restructuring businesses that are either struggling or need to make a move. Was that just coincidence, or is it something you've actually sought out?
Sheer coincidence.
Really?
Sheer coincidence, because up until moving into British Home Stores, 19 years with Asda, very stable business. 2 years with Co-op, with the Summerfield, very stable businesses. BHS was a restructuring, so Philip Green bought the business.
Yep.
It was on its knees, it was losing money, etc. We probably took us 2.5 years to restructure and reposition that business, which was, there's a lot of urban myths as to how Philip Green works.
Right.
But those 2.5 years were full on, midnights, most nights, just restructuring a big business. And again, we turned it to £1 billion and over 100 million profit.